blackness. It is the most rawly human that I've ever felt. You're just there, and the joy is overwhelming.
We're more than just going to space for a dangerous trip like we used to. Now we live here.
The sooner you can remap everything to be 3D, the quicker you'll be able to move through here.
That power of adaptation is one of the most beautiful aspects of the human mind.
You have to be able to relax, but there always has to be part of you that's ready to surge. When you see everything that you've ever known, you get this profound sense that the world is small, we are all reliant on one another, and we're all in this together.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm William T. Harris, President and CEO of Space Center Houston, a nonprofit science center. We're a dynamic science and space exploration learning destination. Space Center Houston also serves as the official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center. We share the story of human space exploration, past, present, and future, with more than 1.25 million visitors annually from around the world through on-site and virtual experiences. Thank you for joining this live panel discussion on the largest production ever filmed in space, Space Explorers, the ISS Experience, produced by Felix and Paul Studios in association with Time Studios. This epic four-part immersive series invites you to join 8 astronauts on their life-changing missions aboard the International Space Station. We are especially excited to host this program as we continue to celebrate 20 years of continual human habitation in space aboard the International Space Station. Tonight, we'll hear from experts as they discuss modern cinematographic feats in a live virtual presentation, followed by a discussion. Some topics we will touch upon include what it's like to film more than 200 miles away and what it takes to bring space exploration to viewers on Earth. Panelists include Canadian Space Agency astronaut David Saint-Jacques, NASA astronaut Drew Morgan, Félix Lajeunesse, co-founder and creative director of Felix and Paul Studios, and Jonathan Woods, executive producer of Space Explorers, the ISS Experience. Throughout the program this evening, please email your questions now and during the remarks to questions@spacecenter.org. We will answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentations. Beginning on December 10th, you can watch episode 1, Adapt, daily on the largest 4K screen in Texas at Space Center Houston. This is the world premiere of Space Explorers, the ISS Experience, on a large format screen, and coincides with the 20th anniversary of human presence aboard the International Space Station. Space Center Houston continues to serve as a convening destination and educational resource for everyone during these challenging times. We've increased our digital learning resources for students and adults with authentic science learning you can experience from home. Some of the programs include virtual monthly family campouts, our virtual thought leader series, and we continue to post a variety of fun space-focused topics on our blog. We are open, offering new exhibits and live shows, along with spacious outdoor experiences in accordance with additional health and safety measures at the forefront of our daily operations. We have experiences for the whole family in a safe and sanitized environment. We invite you to celebrate the holidays with us at Space Center Houston's second annual Galaxy Lights presented by Reliant. Galaxy Lights is open nightly through January 3rd, showcasing the most interactive and technologically advanced light display in Texas. Guests will explore the center in a new way with stunning space-themed light installations, 2 kinetic light shows with suspended moving lights and photo stations to set among actual space artifacts. And this year's Galaxy Light celebrates, of course, the 20th anniversary of the ISS with an all-new Lights Around the World display surrounding the new permanent outdoor exhibit of flown SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. To learn more about the activities and programs and to purchase advanced time tickets, please visit our website at spacecenter.org. You can also go to spacecenter.org to view Know Before You Go guide to understand more information before you visit and to plan your visit to Space Center Houston. And now let's begin our Space Explorers, the ISS Experience panel discussion. Episode 1, Adapt, was created in collaboration with the International Space Station, U.S. National Laboratory, NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, and the other space agencies involved with the International Space Station, and was filmed entirely on board the ISS using Felix and Paul Studios' specialized 3D 360-degree virtual reality space camera. Astronauts Anne McClain, David Saint-Jacques, Christina Cook, and Nick Hague star as cast, film crew, and narrators in the first episode of this 4-part immersive series. Subsequent episodes also feature astronauts Jessica Meir, Drew Morgan, and Luca Parmitano. Let me introduce our panelists. Canadian Space Agency astronaut David Saint-Jacques was selected as an astronaut in 2009. He was first assigned to the robotics branch of the NASA Astronaut Office, then successively acted as support astronaut for ISS Expedition 3536, lead capsule communicator or CAPCOM for ISS Expedition 38, deputy CAPCOM for Cygnus 1 and Cygnus 2, ISS resupply missions, lead CAPCOM for Cygnus 3, Cygnus 4, and SpaceX and SpaceX 6 ISS resupply missions. Between December 3rd, 2018 and December 24th, 2019, he circled the globe 3,264 times. He became the 4th Canadian Space Agency astronaut to conduct a spacewalk and the first Canadian Space Agency astronaut to use Canadarm2 to catch a visiting spacecraft. Félix Lajeunesse, co-founder and creative director of Felix and Paul Studios, crafts immersive and interactive experiences that are rooted in connection. Viewers feel deeply moved by the places and people they see and hear, and find themselves completely involved in the moment. Throughout his career, Lajeunesse has fused that sense of immediacy with a spirit of exploration to bring the creative possibilities of 3D, 360-degree cinematic virtual reality, and now AR and MR to life. Jonathan Woods, executive producer of Space Explorers, the ISS Experience, has developed exclusive, groundbreaking projects, setting the bar for innovation for over 8 years and counting at time. From the Emmy Award-winning A Year in Space to the only 360-degree panorama capture from the top of the WC to the work in progress capture of the first ever spacewalk in virtual reality. In his role as executive producer, he's charged with leading and inspiring a diverse global team of 35 visual journalists, producers, photo editors, and filmmakers and their roles to tell the most defining and curiosity-inspiring stories. Andrew Morgan was selected in June 2013 as one of 8 members of the 21st NASA astronaut class. Following initial training, Drew served in the VA robotics branch and the crew operations branch. Drew served as a flight engineer for Expedition 60, 61, and 62. So from July 20th, 2019 through April 17th, 2020. The crew contributed to hundreds of experiments in biology, earth science, human research, physical sciences, and technology. He also conducted 7 spacewalks totaling 45 hours and 48 minutes. Drew's extended missions in space is an increasing knowledge about how the human body responds to longer duration spaceflight through the various investigations he's supported, including the fluid shift study. Our panelists now will provide some information about the backgrounds and the scope of their work. First up, we're going to hear from Félix Lajeunesse and Jonathan Woods. Félix and Jonathan, please begin.
Hey, hello everybody. This is Felix. I'm very honored to be virtually present to introduce you to Space Explorers, the ISS Experience. First of all, I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you to Space Center Houston for hosting this event. I also want to start by saying that ISS Experience is effectively a co-production between Felix and Paul Studios and Time Studios, and it was produced with the extraordinary participation of hundreds of people at NASA Johnson Space Center, at the ISS US National Lab, at Marshall Space Flight Center, NASA headquarters as well, and it was done in collaboration with the Canadian Space Agency, Roscosmos, JAXA, and European Space Agency. So it really was a huge collaborative effort. So it means a lot to be here and be able to share this premiere with you all. I want to say so thank you to everybody who has been involved directly or indirectly in this project and who are present tonight, and everybody who contributed in bringing the experience of space to Earth and helping us make this project a reality. I'm also super honored that astronauts at Saint-Jacques and Saint-Jacques accept to join us. They are both very important protagonists in Space Explorers and ISS Experience. It is episodes 1 and 2 and episodes 4 of the series that will be released later in 2020. So I also want to extend this thank you to all of the astronauts who have participated to this project. The astronauts, they are the protagonists of the ISS Experience and the heart and soul of the project, but they were also our film crew in space over the last 2 years as they performed all of the filming operations in space and worked in close synergy with our teams on the ground. So now I will just take a few minutes to give you some background on the project and show you some behind-the-scene images that will help give you context in regards to how this production was made. So can we go to the next slide, please? So the Space Explorers adventure started a few years ago. So in 2016, we began a collaboration with NASA to bring audiences into the world of human space exploration through the medium of cinematic virtual reality. So we created a first VR series that was filmed here on Earth that was called Space Explorers: The Journey Begins. Next slide, please. So for this first series, we focused on the training of a new generation of NASA astronauts, and we explored in parallel the dynamics of collaboration in the world of human spaceflight. In these initial episodes, our core intent really was to give audiences the impression of not being a spectator, but of being a protagonist, being an astronaut inside the story. And so we placed our virtual reality cameras wherever astronauts go during their training, from the cockpit of a T-38 supersonic jet to immersing audiences underwater at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab in Houston. Next slide, please. So after the launch of that initial series, we began the pre-production for the second phase of the Space Explorers franchise called Space Explorers: The ISS Experience. So the original ambition for this project was to create the most immersive media experience of life in space ever made, and to capture the life and the work of the astronauts living in space with great realism, but also with great intimacy, by creating a sense of presence for audiences and making them feel like they are living alongside the astronauts in space. Next slide, please. So in December 2018, we sent 2 virtual reality camera systems to space with SpaceX. And in January 2019, we began production aboard the International Space Station. So this is a picture of astronaut David Saint-Jacques on the very first day of principal photography aboard the space station. Next slide, please. So since we began production about 2 years ago, we have filmed more than 200 hours of extraordinary virtual reality footage inside of the space station. And we have had the great honor of working with 8 international astronauts. And I just want to take a moment to name them. So Christina Cook, Asa Al-Manzouri, Andrew Morgan, Anne McLean, David Saint-Jacques, Luca Parmitano, Nick Hague, and Jessica Meir. Next slide, please. So this is what a typical shoot looks like aboard the space station. So on the left, you can see a picture of astronaut Nick Hague installing the virtual reality camera inside the US lab. And on the right, that's a picture of astronaut Jessica Meir interacting with the virtual reality camera as she was performing a science experiment inside the Japanese experimental module. Next slide, please. So over the course of filming the ISS Experience, we have captured extraordinary astronaut testimonies and special moments with the crew, such as this crew meal with 9 crew members from expeditions 59, 60, and 61. And you can see our virtual reality camera right behind Luca Parmitano in there. And again, that's a scene that once you see it is pretty extraordinary because it makes you feel like you are inside of that group of people and you're the 10th crew member sharing that special and intimate moment with them. Next slide, please. So we also had the opportunity to capture historical moments during the production of this series, such as the arrival of the SpaceX Demo 2 astronauts and the Crew 1 astronauts just a few weeks ago. Again, you can see our VR camera capturing this moment in action. And next slide, please. So in October of this year, actually just a few weeks ago, we sent a new virtual reality camera system to the International Space Station. This time, a camera system that is designed to film outside of the ISS in the vacuum of space. Next slide, please. So here you can have a closer look at this camera technology that we call the outer space camera. And that was really created to operate in the absence of pressure. And that was also created to tolerate extraordinary temperature variations of about 200 Celsius degrees in outer space. Next slide, please. And so in the coming months, actually early 2021, the date still needs to be locked in, the camera is going to be taken out of the International Space Station and attached to Canadarm2. And we will basically use the robotic arm as a large cinema crane to move the camera around the space station to capture multiple different shots. So the camera, after we film a spacewalk with 2 astronauts, is going to stay a few more days outside, and that will allow us to capture shots of planet Earth, as well as capture a series of establishing shots of the International Space Station that are going to be integrated into the editing of the series. And next slide, please. So the first episode of the ISS Experience, called Adapt, is now available in 3D 360-degree cinematic virtual reality on the Facebook Oculus VR platform. So if you have an Oculus Quest or an Oculus Rift, you can access episode 1 today. And the next episodes of the series are going to be released throughout 2021. In parallel, we produced a 2D giant screen version of the first episode that is presented at Space Center Houston, really with the hope of bringing that experience to a broader audience. And the beauty of a giant screen experience is that it's not virtual reality, but it's so immersive, given the size of the screen, that it really, again, makes you feel like you're there experiencing the story firsthand. And so that screening will soon start at Space Center Houston. I want to hand it off to Jonathan Woods, who has been a huge part of making this project successful. So Jonathan, it's yours.
Thank you, Felix. And thank you to Space Center Houston, the NASA astronauts, Drew Morgan and David Saint-Jacques, for joining us tonight, and to the hundreds, if not thousands, of NASA employees, Canadian Space Agency employees, and all of the international partners from the International Space Station who have made this project a reality from the outset. I think one of the interesting things about this project is that inexorably intertwined in time's DNA is a deep coverage to space and human exploration. And, ever since the first astronauts dared to leave the planet to take these ambitious missions to go where humans have not gone, Time and Life magazine have had a front row seat to these missions. And, out of one of the last projects that I recently finished, which is called A Year in Space on Netflix, that project basically was the birth of the idea that Time also wanted to continue this tradition of ambitious visual human exploration and visual ambition in terms of our coverage of life off of planet Earth. And, you know, the origins of this project and the parallel track that both Felix and Paul Studios and Time Studios were working on from the outset merged into a really beautiful alignment of what is the best of what Felix and Paul Studios is so good at, which is the technical, physical, creative production of extraordinary virtual reality experiences. They are truly the best in the business. And that, in combination with a brand like Time, has made for a really unique marriage of two companies uniquely positioned to, I think, truly transport a global audience, and the result of this ideally is that we're hoping to really transform the way that people understand what it's like to be an astronaut living in space. So it's great to be here with you tonight. And just a brief note on where we are going with this project. You know, we're now 5 years into this project, and Studios, in conjunction with Time Studios, have been studiously working on both the creative aspects of this, as well as at Time we've been working to capture this historic project, the largest production ever filmed in space, 200 hours of footage filmed in space over the course of the last 2 years, culminating with the first ever spacewalk in virtual reality. We will have an opportunity this year across all of our platforms to take you behind the scenes, to show you the technology, the human stories that are involved with the creating of this production. And ultimately, later this year, we're going to be publishing, ideally, a cover story featuring the innovation, the technology, and the ambition of this story in all of its glory. So anyway, thank you for having us. We're looking forward to talking with you tonight.
Wonderful, Felix and Jonathan. Thank you so much. I had the good fortune of seeing the first episode, and it is fabulous. It is so fantastic, and I know the public is really going to love it. And now we're going to actually hear from the astronauts who were part of helping to film this. I'd now like to turn it over to David and to Drew.
Hello. Thank you, Jonathan, William, and Felix for the introduction. Thank you, Space Center Houston, for hosting this. And thank you, everybody who's working on this project, for making it possible. This is just an incredible tool of communication. I have just a few slides to illustrate my words. I don't know if we can put these up. Yeah, so the experience of spaceflight, and in particular just those views you have of our home in space, are really a profound effect on crew members. And we are always looking for a way to host people on board to kind of share. That's an experience that you cannot hoard. So we're really desperate to find ways to make it understood why we are doing the right thing by going to space collectively to push the frontier like that. Next slide, please. So, you know, we spend a lot of time doing talks in schools, and sometimes very intricate with downlinks. Here we are, you know, here I am in space talking to kids in Canada with another astronaut involved. We put a lot of energy trying to find the best ways to share the experience. But really what Felix and Paul and Time Studio have put together is just another step. Next slide, please. When I heard of this this project, of course I had to sign up, and of course because it was also from Canada, it was my baby. It had to work, and I remember the Christmas Day feeling, the day this appeared on my schedule to unpack this camera and set it up. It was really a beautiful moment, and we, as crew, first crew to use this, we had to kind of figure out a way to use it correctly. There's been a lot of work on the ground, of course, to make these projects worthwhile, but still, you know, whenever we do something first time, of course, it's a bit of a prototype. So we put a lot of thought into making this practical, and in conjunction with ground control. Next slide, please. But what's peculiar about the experience in a spacecraft is that, of course, you know, you are it. This is the space toilet, which broke, so we didn't call the plumber. Of course, we have to fix everything. So you can't call the electrician, you can call the ground for help, but you are it when it comes to fixing stuff, be it the toilet or your fragile spacesuit. It's still all on you. Next slide, please. So when it comes to making public relation events and little clips and films, this is the film crew we wish we had, but we don't, of course. In space, we astronauts have to be sound man and cameraman and technician and makeup artist and figure out the scene and the lighting and the sound and all of that. And with good help from the ground. Next slide, please. We were lucky in this particular production to have a lot of help from the ground. Sometimes it's just a script we get, if it's just a little video. But for the footage of these virtual reality events, there was an entire team in the Mission Control Center in Houston or in Huntsville, kind of looking over our shoulder. There was a lot of back and forth discussion to determine the best camera location, the best scenes, and then, fancy detail work about the lighting, the sound level, the sound check. So we put a lot of effort because I think as crew members, we were acutely aware that this was a tool of unprecedented sort of reach potential. And we really wanted to seize the opportunity to tell the story with such a powerful tool. Next slide, please. So, space station is a very cluttered place. Here's Jessica working on some scientific experiment, and you can't probably see the camera at first glance because it is kind of completely swollen into the technical environment. Next slide, please. Change focus, and there it is. And I think that's really what the camera felt like. It felt like someone standing in the room. It felt like you were talking not to a camera, but to a person. And also, not only because of the size and presence of it, but because of the way the scenes were selected and the way the hints were given about the content that was desired. We were really encouraged to be candid and kind of almost ad-lib it. And so I think it created a feeling. The only way to make it work, basically, was to convince yourself you were talking to someone. And I think most of us got into that groove where we were basically welcoming people on board. Next slide, please. And it's not only technical stuff we filmed, of course. Most of what I got the chance to film was just daily life and to kind of share the human experience of human space flight. That really is a big part of it. Just living there is the result of huge efforts to create that entirely artificial environment where humans can thrive, work, live, and play. Next slide, please. And this is as good as I can make it to kind of bring people on board on my Sunday morning family video conference. I would have the same breakfast as my kids would have on this little video chat. And I thought this is pretty much the best I could ever make for them after they've endured all the absence, and for my wife to keep the family together. I wish they could come here. We always would joke, astronauts, it would be the perfect job if you could host your family and friends over the weekend, but you can't. You're stuck there. Next slide, please. And so, we were left to sharing this kind of virtually with our loved ones. But I can tell you, when we got a virtual headset from Felix and Paul and to kind of sneak preview of the episode, and my kids could put it on and go to space station with Dad, it was unbelievable. It was really unbelievable. I mean, it was unbelievable for me because I felt like I was back there, but I've been there, so it's not as powerful, I think, for them who it was the first time. And I'm hearing the same from space professionals, flight controllers, managers who dedicated their entire life to the space program, but have never been to those spacecrafts, and there they are, able to kind of feel like they are there. I think this is really, really powerful. So that was sort of my kind of personal experience of working with this camera. Drew did a lot of work also. Drew was on my backup crew, so there's a funny thing that we're very close together as we train, but then your backup crew launches 2 crews after you, so you don't see each other for a year. Because you go to space, by the time you come back, they're on their way to launch, you don't see them, then they're in space, and finally they come back. And so, Drew, I think you worked a lot maybe on more kind of technical filming, including preparation for a spacewalk and things like that.
Yeah, David, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the groundwork that you and Anne laid and learned the operations of how to be creative with setting up the camera. You know, do we attach it to the wall? Do we attach it to the floor? Do we attach it overhead? How do we hide those cables? Because those cables can, you know, there's a lot of cables all over the place on ISS, and this is just another one. And how do we route this? And all those things that you and Anne had to figure out early on were passed on to us. And then you shot a number of scenes on your time on board, and then we got to do the same thing, and we expanded on what you guys were able to do. And in this first episode, Adapt, you'll see a lot of the daily activities of living that you guys filmed while you were up there. Our crew progressed on to, Felix alluded to, we got to film a nine crew period of time when we had 3 Soyuz vehicles attached to the ISS and a group meal all together. A number of astronaut logs where we're just talking to the camera like David described, where we treat that camera like it's another person, because we know that one day somebody's going to be on the other end, just like everyone listening tonight will get an opportunity to see. We are talking to that camera like it's another crew member, because that's what makes this immersive cinematography so valuable. I also would reiterate what David said about it being unscripted. The guidance that we were given was very general and gave us free rein to talk about what we wanted and just see where it went. Most of the time, I would take a look at the questions beforehand and get a little idea of where I wanted to start, but often I never ended where, took me places where I never imagined. And I just spoke to that camera like it was another crew member. And it was actually, I think a lot of us were surprised by the emotions that came out as a result of that. I can remember in particular one of my early astronaut logs where it was just me and the camera talking. Just a few days after the 2-3 days after I had arrived up there, and talking about the experience of the launch and it stirring up that emotion of describing of what it was like to not only ride a rocket and dock with the ISS, but then how magical it is to see your friends, to arrive to familiar faces, to greet you, and there's allusion to that as well in this first episode, which I only recently got to see, and I was just blown away. And I didn't even see it in virtual reality with Oculus. I saw it strictly in 2D, and I was just so impressed with the quality of just the editing and the cinematography aspect of it, which is something that I really enjoy, which is one of the fun parts of being a part of this project, was that not only are you the actors and the actresses, but you're also the film crew, like David's described, where you are deciding what the scene is going to look like, and you can orchestrate these things and facilitate them happening very naturally. So I would, when I look back on what the value of this payload, we treat this like, this is a scientific experiment on board the ISS. It has 2 primary values. One is that David has alluded to, it's a communication tool. It's a way for us to communicate to the public about what is so fantastic about exploring space and living and working in space, and why we need to continue to do this. Then the second thing is, I think it has a huge potential for training astronauts and training people on the ground that support us to be able to immerse themselves in our environment and really understand it in a way that two-dimensional photographs and video, conventional video, just cannot do. And when you put on that VR headset and you look all around and you get a full sense of that immersive cinematography, it is transformative, and it has really been awesome for us to be a part of this. David, I also need to mention that we did film some preparation for a spacewalk. My entire crew did, and that will tie nicely into these scenes that we'll shoot here in the next year, when we take this camera, as Felix described, outside and film astronauts outside. And imagine the experience of of communication, as I described, but also the value in one day training an astronaut that hasn't been to space to be able to put on that VR headset and look around and see the ISS all around them. It's going to be very, very cool. It's going to be a game changer, and we were all very honored to be a part of this project, and we're excited to see the products start to roll out. So this is exciting for us. David, anything else on before we hand it off?
I think you nailed it. I remember a kind of a endearing comment by Jessica, who just said she saw the first episode just before launching, and she was interested in looking at us. She was interested in looking at the lab, looking at Node 1, looking at Node 3, places that she's only seen this kind of iffy mock-up that we use for training. And for the first time, she could kind of look around. It's okay, this is where I'm going to be in a week, kind of thing.
Wow, gentlemen, thank you so much. That was so interesting. And something I do want to say, having watched it, is, and I've had the great opportunity to, through Space Center Houston, look at some of our VR programs on International Space Station and training. But this was the most vicarious experience I could ever imagine being on Space Station. I felt like I was there, and I felt like I was part of the crew. So I really congratulate you on the technology, and I think it's both the technology and the conceiving of it, but also the capturing of the imagery, the editing, all of the components that bring it together. So I'm curious, because I kind of grew up in an era of IMAX large format films, and I know there have been some large format films done about space. And back in the day, the IMAX cameras were the size of a Volkswagen. I mean, they were huge that they had to use. And I was so impressed to see the size of this camera, this technology that you're using. How did you conceive of coming up with a camera that functions in microgravity and then also will work in the vacuum of space for the spacewalks?
Mm-hmm. So form factor, I would say it's been a process. When we started doing virtual reality and creating virtual reality technologies, they were bigger at the beginning. And then year after year, we managed to kind of shrunk them down. In this specific context, our cameras that we had at Felix and Paul Studios, they were just not small enough to go to space. And we decided to use an existing camera that was called the Zcam V1 Pro. And we asked our engineers to modify it because the form factor of that camera was already small and smaller than what we were getting at with our own technology. So we actually took that camera and we changed the thermal management system, because obviously heat dissipation doesn't work the same way when there is no gravity. And we also had to build a calibration system that allows the camera head to sort of perform a series of slit scan rotations that gives us very precise stereoscopic 360 data that we then use in post-production to create accurate scale. Because what you want in virtual reality, in order to have that sense of presence and that sense of immersion, is to experience the world around you as it is. Like if I have Andrew Morgan talking to me, Andrew, you alluded to that, as if you were talking to a person, then I want to see the person at real life scale. And if I look at the environment, I want to get a sense that the environment is at the right scale. So there was a lot of work in order to achieve that, and all of the technology that we developed in order to perform the calibration were all about getting the scale right, in post-production. So it's just a lot of details like that we had to develop in order to create an impression that when you experience the piece, you just don't think about technology anymore, because it just looks like you're there. It looks like a completely transparent experience of you being there with the astronauts, and there's no more conceptions of a camera, or you see what I mean? So making technology transparent was the goal when we started this.
Well, we always talk about something that's widely studied with astronauts is the overview effect. And I have to tell you, I almost felt like I had it watching the documentary because it was so realistic. And I can only imagine, and I saw the 2D version, I can only imagine seeing an Oculus Rift or Oculus Guest, one of the Quest, one of these other kind of technologies that are out there. And so I'll just make a pitch that for people who come see it at Space Center Houston, we have a 4K theater. And so it's extremely high definition. So you are going to feel as if you are part of the crew when you watch this. So I'm curious with, for Drew and for David, Did you get training beforehand in how to use the camera before you launched into space? Or it sounds as though you kind of intuitively learned. There were some instructions and you had some guidance, but you had to kind of figure it out on your own.
Yes, I remember getting some training, but I think the procedures were still in development while I was going through pre-flight training. So we kind of converged. I made it to space at the same time as the camera made it to space, and the procedures were coming together. But there was, Felix and his team were very, very open to our concerns, to our comments, and you could tell there was a lot of brain juice on the ground trying to kind of answer our worries and kind of optimize the procedures and the software. And even to the selection of scenes, they're very, very open to our suggestions, and we're constantly, you could tell they were kind of trying to see how to include our ideas in the final product. So, but no, that's one of those where we had an idea what it was like. I remember the first time you showed me a prototype, actually, Felix, visiting Houston. But no, it was mostly again, credit to the great procedures that were written by our folks in Huntsville to kind of make the bridge between the great new idea and the operational crew on board. I mean, there's this bridge that has to exist to make them talk to each other. So it was a great example of collaboration between many, many people from many, many teams.
Yeah, I would say the procedure continued to be refined even while I was on board, but the technical aspects of operating the camera were actually pretty straightforward. There was a power cord and a data cord and a laptop computer. It was conceptually pretty easy to wrap your mind around, and I think a lot of the thing that made it challenging was the problem solving of where exactly are we going to set this thing up, and how are we going to route the cables through the lab or the most particular module that we're doing the filming in. How are we going to, like I mentioned earlier, how are we going to obscure those so that they're not floating in the middle of the module? And we had a special arm called a bogan arm that was kind of, and David, I don't know that was it intent, a bogan arm always intended. By the time we arrived, we had double bogan arms that were connecting it.
I think I can claim credit for that invention.
Yeah, I'll give you credit. It was ingenious invention. And when we had the double bogan arm, that essentially gave us the robotic arm outside the station, gave us more degrees of freedom of how that we could position it, and gave us more flexibility, and where we could maybe get the same shot whether we mounted it on what we would call the floor or the ceiling or the wall, and be able to come up with a couple of different options. That's where the challenge is, and there's no way you could train that. And I would never even recommend that we even spend time training that on the ground, because it's a problem solving in the moment.
And so I think sound is another aspect that we have a lot of training, generic training about how to make a good image and good lighting for all the filming we do with other means. But for sound, we're not really used to. And this was particular because we're all wearing lapel mics, and there was surround sound, ambient sound being recorded. And the one particularly sort of I want to say anxiety-provoking aspect, but a peculiarity of the system is you can't really look at your shots once you push the record button. This is so many megabytes of data being taken. There's no way you look at it. Someone can look at it on the ground in many weeks and tell you if you did a good job or not, or if you had to retake that shot. So that kind of makes you really triple check everything and make sure that when you hit record, it's going to be good.
It's a very interesting comment because there's a scene in Adapt, the first one, when Anne McClain is orienting Christina Cook to the station. And you recognize how every inch is crammed with something. There's some kind of tool or electronics or storage area. And Anne makes this comment about how easy it is to trip on something or unintentionally unplug something. And so here you are with this very sophisticated device and trying to figure out how to make it work, how to get kind of the optimal both recording and also imagery. So I really commend you on that work. Something that I particularly found amazing was the ambient noise of station, because it is a mechanical vehicle traveling at 17,000 miles an hour. you recognize that there is a mechanics to it, right? And it kind of twerks and makes noise and things happen. And so that kind of vicarious experience was really thrilling. That was
And
really
every module has its sound. That was what I was kind of hit by watching the episode. I would close my eyes and, oh yeah, moving to node 3. Yeah, that's the sound of node 3. And then it was one of those things you don't remember sort of consciously, but you remember it unconsciously. You know, setting up that camera and making those shots, it's a little bit like, imagine say, okay, we're going to make a documentary inside the kitchen of a really busy restaurant without interfering with people's work. That's what it felt like sometimes.
Well, that is so interesting that you say that, because I imagine that there are things that come back to you that you just, this is all about adaptation, right? So you adapt to being in this incredible vehicle, and it's the size of a football field. And so there are probably things that your body just in your senses filter out, right? You just you adapt to that environment. And it sounds as though these are things, it makes you pay attention to things that you normally would not pay attention to.
And on the converse, when you're adapted, you kind of, everything becomes normal. It becomes your normal. And then you wake up a Sunday morning and you go to the cupola, look at the earth, and you go, oh, we ran out of coffee with sugar. That's so annoying. These are the things you focus on.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, Felix and Jonathan, you must have hours and hours and hours of footage, that was captured, and how exciting to go through and filter it out. But, one of the great things about NASA is you're documenting things that could be of great value to advance space exploration. And so are you thinking, or do you have plans to kind of share this more broadly with either the science community or with NASA? Because they're always studying station, right? They're looking at how to refine it, improve it. If this vehicle is 20 years old, of course, and it was in design many years before that, and it's constantly being modified and adapted, and there are plans to add additional modules to it. There's conversations about, maybe a successor module at some point in the future. Are you making some of that content available to NASA to further its own research?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so, because we mentioned earlier that we filmed 200 hours. That's a huge amount of footage, but the final product, unfortunately, is not 200 hours. The final product is 120 minutes. It's 4 episodes of 30 minutes, and there's a lot that we see that we think is extraordinary, but we can't make it fit into the narrative flow, into the story. And looking at the reactions that we've got so far from astronauts, but also from NASA operatives in regards to watching the footage, the potential of that footage for situational awareness is extraordinary, is amazing, and therefore we see value in being able to give that footage or share that footage more broadly inside of NASA as a way to further research and to help with research. So we definitely see value in that. So the first phase is definitely for us going to be releasing the episodes, and then after that, I think that we will kind of open it up to the community in a way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure you probably put together a pretty good bloopers reel.
Well, that's funny you say that. One thing I wanted to do is that in space, astronauts, you didn't have a clap. And so for syncing sound, astronauts would go like this. And then sometimes they would say, oh, did it work? And then they would do it again. And so I have countless amounts of footage of astronauts clapping in 0G. And I thought I need to do something about that. Like that in itself would be extraordinary.
I love that. I think you absolutely should do that, Felix. I think that'd be fantastic. Drew, when you were talking about your daily log and how you were sharing that daily log on camera, as part of this, it made me think of The Martian and how, astronauts are always documenting their experiences and really understanding their journey. And I'm wondering if, both you and David could talk a little bit about how you adapted being in a contained environment, being away from family and friends, especially in this period of time when not only in the United States, but around the world, we're dealing with COVID-19. And we're having to make decisions around managing our environments, being away from family and friends for extended periods of times for the well-being of everyone. Do you have some insights or tools that you both have developed to help you in being away from family and friends? You shared a little bit about the video connection, and having the Zoom time and trying to do things together virtually with your families. What are some of the tools that you have developed that help you maintain those ties with family and friends and also keep you emotionally and psychologically whole while you're on station?
Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, so I'd start with just the aspect of the importance of, I see great value in journaling and documenting and doing these things that sometimes you're writing down or you're speaking to the camera and you're talking about the most mundane, what would otherwise seem like a very mundane, boring thing to you now in the moment, but in context later, a lot of these things that we are documenting on these cameras become very poignant. And so for the historical reasons alone, I think that there's value in documenting this way. And this project forced us to do it in ways that we sometimes, we would be in our timeline, built in multiple times throughout our mission, an opportunity to talk to the camera, for an hour and a half and just whatever comes out. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes it went places I never intended. I even thought about, well, I better write to them and tell them, let's not include that because that was just a little bit too raw. But the significance of that is for the purposes of history, of documenting where we are psychologically at different stages in our mission it's critical, and to have that kind of raw expression. But I think like we are right now, connecting virtually, this has become the norm over the last year. This is starting to feel like just business as usual. But when I arrived home in April, this was all still very new to the rest of the world. But it is what the reality of how the only way I could connect with friends and family while I was on board for 9 months was either by phone or by email, and then on select opportunities about once a week, like David alluded to, being able to have a video conference with your family, our friends and family on special occasions. And that felt like a treat. It wasn't something that was just readily available to us. We couldn't do that on demand. That was scheduled for a special occasion or once on a weekend. And that became our mainstay. That was what, one of the things you lived for on the weekend was to be able to connect that way. David, did you have, and I'm sure you have additional to add.
No, I think I agree with everything you said. And William, I want to push it a little bit further when you talk about, our living in a pandemic right now and their similarities with the life in space. It was a bit eerie for me in the month of March when we hit the first sort of requirements for restrictions and confinement, to realize that I somehow felt prepared. It's weird, like I had been there already, and it didn't come to me as a shock that it came as for most people, out of the sheer novelty of having to restrict yourselves in such a way. I think the reasons why it was similar is for the following reasons. First, there's similar challenge in keeping a sense of why, a sense of purpose. After almost 7 months in space, it wasn't easy every day, but I would float to the cupola and look at the Earth and think of the science experiments we're doing and remind myself of my mission. Why am I doing this? Why are we doing this? And so, pandemic is the same thing. We kind of remind ourselves doing this to protect the most frail people in our society, to protect our healthcare system. These are all worthy missions. So the requirement to remind yourself of why you're doing this. And at the same time, at the other end of the mental spectrum, a requirement to kind of focus on the little things, enjoy what you're doing right now. I don't know if you remember, Drew, but there's this graffiti on ARED left by Tracy that says, there's nothing more important than what you're doing right now. I remind myself every day of that, these wise words. And so there's that moral aspect. Then there's the very sort of practical aspect. You need to organize yourself. For us in space, it's obvious. With the sun rising 16 times a day, you can't look out the window and figure out what time it is. If you want to have any structure to your day to be successful, you need to artificially do that. Live by events. Parents all know that kids need a structure. Well, adults too, except normally life gives us a structure. And now we have to give it to ourselves when we're teleworking. So, if you spend your day in pajamas, it's just not going to work. So make a schedule. Keep time for exercise, for talk to your friends, decide this is the beginning of the day, the end of the day. All these things we do in space. That's the only way we can sort of function there for a long time, by structuring ourselves. And then there's the interpersonal aspect. Flight controllers in Houston, they can help us with many, many systems. But there's one thing they can't really help us with is our relationships among ourselves, among the crew. And there are people we love and we have trained for years, and we trust each other and depend on each other. But as we all know, during these days of confinement, sometimes, even if you live 24/7 people you love, sometimes there's tension. And you can't go outside for a walk, especially when you're in space. You can't do that at all. It's a very organized process. So you kind of become very attuned to knowing when someone needs to be left alone versus when someone needs to talk. Or if there's a little conflict brewing, you want to, tackle that before it explodes in your face. So I don't know, I think there's so many parallels with the tricks that we developed to survive long space missions, and with the kind of the odd circumstances that most of the world lives in right now. It was, I don't know about you, Drew, but I somehow, me and my family, we kind of felt like we were already prepared a little bit because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the takeaways from my mission was my ability to connect with friends and family on the ground, and in such a deliberate way, be intentional in a way that I just, living a busy life on Earth pre-pandemic, where you don't have time to do that, but now you make time to do those things. And when I did have, whether that was a virtual conversation or a phone conversation, everybody was thrilled to have a call with me from space, but also to be just very intentional about that connection. And I think that's something that translates very well to living in isolation now, as we are, I never could have imagined when I left the ISS in April that we would still be in this situation in December, but it's been a skill that I've brought along with me as I've returned to Earth and now living with my family in these walls.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. I think something I take away from what you said is living life with purpose, right? That's very important. And be it the most minor thing to the greatest thing, always live life with purpose. I'm going to turn now. We're going to get a lot of questions from the audience. People are really quite curious about a number of aspects of the production of Adaption. And one of the first ones is, what is the footage captured on, and how did you get the content back to Earth?
So the footage is captured both on SD cards and on an SSC computer that is plugged to the camera. And then we download proxy files to Earth. Basically, what we receive as offline proxy files is sort of a, when you look at those books and you have an unfolded world map. So that's kind of what it looks like. It's a monoscopic 360 image that is unfolded and that is roughly stitched. It's a rough assembly of what all of the 9 cameras sees, basically. So we use that to create the offline edit of the project. It allows us to make selections, and then we can go back to the camera in space and ask for the camera to be plugged in, and we can download the high resolution files, but only for the selections that we have made at the offline stage. And that allows us not to sort of load the internet connection with our request for high resolution transfer of files. Felix, so that is pretty much the way we do it. Yeah.
Felix, it might be worth mentioning too that in the context of the capture that we do on station, that during these moments when we're doing astronaut logs and all the sort, you actually have the ability to interface live with the astronauts as they are recording to make sure that we are getting frame rate and connection to the media and all the necessary technical specifications correct along the way.
Absolutely. So we've been doing operations working with NanoRacks that is based in Houston, actually, and that allows us to see what we're doing in real time in space. So for example, if an astronaut is doing a camera setup, first of all, we will generally see what the astronaut is doing from a video camera. Think of that as a surveillance camera that is actually pointed at the setup, so we can see and give feedback if need be in regards to the creative aspect of camera setups. But we can also, from a distance, see what the camera sees during the setup, and if there are some problems with exposure, if there are some problems with aperture, whatever it is, or frame rate, we can either do it from a distance, or we can ask the astronauts to get into the camera menu and do it locally. So it gives us really a sense of creative and technological assistance, from the ground, and that really helps, I think, the process.
Wow, that's so interesting. So there's a question about the EVA capture. A lot of questions, actually. People are quite fascinated by this and the 360 and the virtual footage that you're going to capture. There's a question about how long will the cameras remain on the external part of the station? Will they just stay out there for a period of time, and will they be out there long enough for you to capture the light path of a complete orbit or complete orbits? I mean, I can just imagine visually it'd be amazing when you pull all that back together again. So it'll be capturing the astronauts doing spacewalks, but are you thinking about keeping the cameras external for a longer period of time and collecting that footage?
Absolutely. So the cameras are going to stay for a few days outside. So one day is really going to be dedicated to capturing the spacewalk, and then there will be a few days for capturing just visuals of the outside with no astronauts. There is definitely an intention to capture full orbit around the Earth by actually extending the robotic arm, the Canadian arm, far enough from station that your complete 360 3D field of view is planet Earth, and you're just basically, as a viewer, flying above the planet. So if you turn around, you will see the station and you will see Canadian arm attached to you, but when you will look down, you will be flying above the planet. And in those circumstances, what we want to do is really capture from sunrise to sunset and doing day passes and night passes. And so, yeah, definitely we will make very good use of the time that we have in space with this camera to capture as much extraordinary visuals as we can, definitely.
Well, that is absolutely fascinating. I could just imagine capturing footage of passing asteroids and other things that you may not know are passing through or close to Earth or through our solar system in some way. That could absolutely be fascinating.
I mean, I think that's one of the most fascinating things that we as earthbound humans have always seen as the delights of being able to be an astronaut on orbit. And I think, speaking for Felix a bit, the things that inspire us to capture is the northern lights, the aurora borealis, and some of these magnificent scenes that you get that are truly awe-inspiring, that are a once-in-a-lifetime perspective that only 600 or so people have seen that have flown on a rocket off our planet. And that is the thing that I think at the beginning of all of this, that both Felix and Paul Studios and Time saw as one of the original, like the genesis of why this project is so important. And David and Drew both touched on this in some of their remarks. It provides such a platform to transform the way that we understand what it is like to be an astronaut in a microgravity experience. So I think truly harnessed, encapsulated in all of this is like the power of where we're hoping to go.
Well, I have to say, I really appreciate astronauts allow themselves to be constantly photographed and filmed. And I mean, I know that you have down to your private time, but really thank you, gentlemen, and to all the other astronauts in the Corps for allowing us to have this vicarious experiences through you. And because I think more than anything else, people want to understand, as you're saying, Jonathan, what is it like to do this job? And what does it require? And what are the challenges? And what are the moments of excitement and opportunity? And I feel like through this episode, you really grasp it. I mean, you really feel as though you were there with the crew and having these experiences. One of the wonderful scenes, and I know this is an important part of the psychosocial well-being of astronauts, is sharing a meal together. And I love that scene of the special times, the special meals, the conversations about what you're eating. And it's very familiar because that's part of the human experience, right? Having the kind of social interaction with friends and family around a meal. It's really fundamental to us as human beings. So again, thank you for letting us be part of those meals.
You know, we call it life in the fishbowl. That's sort of the experience of being an astronaut. I think that was pushing it to an extreme. And imagine this: we film a lot of stuff on board space station, but it's always with a regular camera. So there's always an onstage part, and most of the station is backstage. But with this camera, we all came to realize that there is no backstage area. It's all on stage. The whole place is on stage. The whole crew is on stage. If you don't want to be in this shot, well, you got to have to hide somewhere and be really, really quiet because it is capturing everything. So I think that was part of the mental sort of jump that made us see this camera as another crew member, as someone we're talking to. It kind of helped us get into the mood of being just a bit more candid in our confidences. So this is no backstage with this camera. It's all on stage.
Well, I feel like it was almost a throwback to the old MTV, original reality shows, and I think that's what makes it so interesting and engaging and so informational in such a great way. Is it's very authentic. This is not scripted, and I really commend Felix and Jonathan for taking that risk and saying, we're just going to give you some guardrails, and within this, these are kind of the things and storylines we'd like you to address or to explore. And so it is completely authentic. You are hearing the real conversations, and also I think it was probably serendipitous but the good thing is it wasn't a real crisis, but there was a fire alarm, as part of this. And you kind of see the astronauts are doing their everyday things, and the alarm goes off, and, we're very fragile organisms. Horrible things can happen with station. It's traveling at this incredible speed around Earth. And so you get to see how the astronauts respond and deal in these scenarios. And I thought that was a really remarkable scene.
Yeah, I actually talked to Nick Hague today, and I don't know if I knew he had shot that scene where he's running on the treadmill and there's an alarm, and you see that is unscripted. That's his realization. He looks at the caution warning panel, processes. This is early on in his mission too, if I recall, that this is real, and very calmly detaches himself from the treadmill, and they go into their fire response, and it's all captured right there on the camera.
Absolutely fascinating.
And of course, a scene like that, you cannot plan this. It happens, and on that day, what we were filming is Nick Hague training on the treadmill. That was the creative objective of that scene. And we were filming the full exercise. Sometimes we film for a long time because we do a camera setup at the beginning, then we capture the whole sequence of activity, and then there's camera, is being taken away. And so we probably filmed Nick running on the treadmill for, I don't know, an hour maybe. And during that process, eventually that happened. And the beauty of virtual reality filmmaking is that the camera is positioned in the hatch between node 1 and node 3. And he's there, and then all of the astronauts come in to intervene and turn around, and they're all there. And so we're capturing all of the action at the same time, what is happening from Nick's perspective, but also what is happening inside of node 1 with all of the other astronauts, and we're not missing anything, and so that was extraordinary. When I reviewed that, I thought it was such an extraordinary and precious scene that we had captured in a completely accidental way. We could have never ever planned for something like this. And yeah, I think it's one of the scenes that is the most striking inside of episode 1.
Felix, to go back for a moment to a year in space with Scott Kelly's year-long mission to the space station, there was a moment where a piece of Russian satellite debris was hurtling at the space station at a closing velocity of like 30 miles per second. And I think one of the most frightening things for me trying to capture the magnitude of that journey that he did, the expedition that any astronaut does when they throw themselves into a space station that's hurtling around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour in a vacuum, is that your life is on the line, and there are thousands and tens of thousands of pieces of space debris up there that could impact the space station at any moment. And the real life dangers and the perils of that are never fully known by the earthbound, gravity centric beings that we are. And that reality is just something that I think in that moment, and I hope if you do, for the people watching this tonight and the people that can tune in later, experience this, if you put on a headset and you see that moment, you understand for a moment what it's like to have to deal with a crisis when you are not in control. And that is something that I think, for David and Drew, they train for this. They train thousands of hours. They train for 6 years before they go to space to be able to understand what it's like to deal with that reality on a day-to-day basis. And they take it in stride, and they do it so beautifully. Felix and I have come to realize this in a way that is, I think, very unique to the billions of people that live on this planet. But it is a truly special and unique thing to understand what it is like to realize the perils, the pitfalls, the promises, and the ambition that it involves to do what these men and women do on a daily basis. It's remarkable.
If I may, the thing is, you can't live in fear the whole time. So the only way you can survive this constant threat is by having the confidence that you did your homework, you trained as much as you could, you understood your equipment, your system, your procedures, you did everything you could. Okay, now let's just get on with life up there. And it is something we never really talk about, but really objective number one in a space mission is to come back alive. That's the first box you want to tick. And so we're all, and that's something we don't really talk about much, but it really is on the back of your mind. When you're in a launch pad, you kind of have to be in a position in your life where it's okay to not come back. You've done everything you have to do, and then coming back is great, because then you can share the experience and talk about it, and close your eyes and go back to the cupola at the space station, or put on your VR headset and go back even more realistically.
Yes. This has been such a fascinating conversation. I do want to ask Felix and Jonathan how people will be able to see this film. We know we're going to be premiering it tomorrow, the 2D version of Adapt, the first of 4 episodes at Space Center Houston. So guests at Space Center Houston will be able to see it there. It'll be showing every day. But if you could share with us when the virtual reality versions and other versions will come available for the public who might be watching this in other parts of the country or the world.
So absolutely. So the virtual reality version is available, and I'm talking about episode 1, since October 22nd on the Oculus platform. So Oculus Quest users or Oculus Rift users can go into the Oculus store and have access to episode 1 now. Episode 2, 3, and 4 are going to be released pretty much once per quarter next year. So the full series, the 4-episode series, by the end of the year, next year, is going to be fully available in virtual reality. In parallel to that, we are also distributing the content on giant screen at Space Center Houston. We will also create a planetarium, dome and planetarium version of the content that will be distributed across North America first, and then eventually tour the world. For people in Europe and in Asia, we are also distributing the content on mobile devices as 360 video content. People can watch on their 5G connected mobile devices, tablets, or phones. And later down the line, after the whole production is finished, we will also produce a television version of Space Explorers, the ISS Experience. So really, we're aiming to make this content available to everybody, wherever they are, across all platforms in the coming years.
Great. I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit, tease us about the subsequent episodes that will be coming up of Advance, Unite, and Expand, kind of what each one of those will touch upon.
So as we know now, ADAPT is really about adaptation to life in space. The second episode, called Advance, focuses more on the work and science of the astronauts aboard the space station. The third episode, called Unite, deals with the idea of the community of astronauts and the international collaboration. And we also look at the overview effect in a more in-depth way in that third episode. And finally, Expand really is focused on spacewalks. And we also look at the future of human spaceflight in that final episode.
Fascinating. I cannot wait to see the subsequent episodes. I absolutely love the first one, Adapt, and I think that the public is really going to enjoy it as well. Well, I so regret we've come to the end of our time. I've really enjoyed my conversation with all of you this evening, and want to express, heartfelt thanks to Felix and Paul Studios, of course, to Felix and Jonathan, and also Times Studios, and of course to our astronauts this evening, David and Drew. Thank you all so much for joining us. I really want to remind everyone that tomorrow you can see Adapt, the premiere of the 2D version at Space Center Houston, and hope that you will come down and explore and better understand the wonders of space exploration. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I want to remind all of our viewers to follow the science and mask up, social distance, wash your hands with soapy water for at least 20 seconds. Thank you for joining us this evening, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Happy holidays.
Bye-bye. Au revoir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.